Welcome to the chapel of Robinson College here at the University of Cambridge. This term we're considering voices from outside the window, voices from beyond the range of acceptable discourse and opinion. And today we consider Wikipedia, who runs it, who can edit it, who profits from it. And we're delighted to welcome Helen Buyniski, an investigative journalist from helenofdestroy.com. We begin our interview with a brief reading from Scripture. Helen Buyniski, a very warm welcome to Robinson College.
Good to be here, thank you.
Your article about Wikipedia, which it looks as though it's updated as time goes by. This is not a dead document. Your account of Wikipedia's background and its conduct today, it sounds very much like it began as some kind of a democratic, egalitarian, free access encyclopedia and has gradually morphed itself, and not by accident, into a digital protection racket. Can you explain how most of us think Wikipedia functions?
Well, most people think that Wikipedia is, as it purports to be itself, an encyclopedia edited by the people who use it. So like the average person can just come along, create an account, or not even create an account, just come on, sign in and make changes to whatever event or person they feel they know about. Now, that is, according to the founders, what it was supposed to be. And there's an interesting split between the founders. Of course, Jimmy Wales, who has presented himself as the only founder now and tried to edge out Larry Sanger, the other guy who founded it, who, if you listen to him at least, who did more of the philosophical underpinnings of Wikipedia, who agrees with me and sounds like with you that it has morphed into something very sinister and something that is not at all like the democratic paradise that it purported to be in the beginning. But yeah, it's basically become, there's multiple tiers of protection racket, of course. If you're a high-level political figure and you have the wrong beliefs about, say, whether the US should be at war in Syria or whether NATO should be dominating the world or whatever, then you will probably find yourself with some not so flattering lines in your Wikipedia biography. And there's really not much that you can do about that unless you have access to some senior figures in whatever intelligence agency in the country you happen to be doing your political business. But and then there's lower level figures like the average businessman who say he wants some good profile for his Wikipedia page, so he can pay an editor to put in a nice Wikipedia profile for him. And it's really the whole, it runs the gamut from like your local computer shop to like, and Monsanto had like a big campaign to minimize its, Monsanto now of course is synonymous with causing cancer and various other unpleasant chemical reactions, but it wasn't always this way, of course, and Wikipedia did a lot of work to try to keep that under wraps. And all the way up to like your political figures. I mean, if you looked at I did a pretty close analysis of the 2016 election coverage, and it was ridiculous because you had Hillary Clinton's biography page, which was completely protected, really glossily done to the point where you had like, you could actually press a button and it would read the page to you, which means that the page is not changing very much because otherwise they would have to re-record the recording every time. And it wasn't like that. And then Trump's page, of course, was changing every 5 minutes because you had everybody coming along and putting whatever smears in there. Now, I'm not a Trump fan, but I'm certainly not a Clinton fan either. And at any rate, it doesn't matter what I am, because the point is that Wikipedia purports to be a neutral source of knowledge, and it's anything but that. I mean, it's so overtly political that, I mean, the funny part is that it's that what Jimmy Wales himself is a very sincere devotee of Ayn Rand's libertarianism, and so. Yeah, and which is funny because like Wikipedia, of course, presents itself as this neoliberal centrist, well, they would call it like democratic.
Right, so if I, as an unknown entity, want to go into Donald Trump's Wikipedia page and say something true and terrible about him, I could probably get easy access. And if what I say is vaguely justifiable, it might not be taken down by the editors?
Yeah, that's, I mean, I'm not sure what the status of his page is now, that you might have to have an actual account to edit it, but it's not on any of the upper levels of protection. There's multiple levels of protection. You can either, there are the pages that have no protection on them, in which you can just be any old person who doesn't have a Wikipedia account and you can come in and edit, or you can be, the next level up is you have to have an account, but it doesn't matter. As long as you have an account, you've registered yourself, you can edit. And then up that, it's like you have to have made a certain number of edits in a certain variety of pages, and those are for the more contested subject areas like American politics or Israel Palestine. And then it goes up and up, and then there are some that are just no editing, no way, no how, and those are like the Hillary Clintons and the, I guess, the Barack Obamas and the royalty, as you would call them.
So, as the same non-entity in terms of being a public figure goes, if I could probably gain access to a Donald Trump thing if I want to say something negative. If I were to say something about, say, Hillary Clinton's, the Clinton Foundation and its history in Haiti, could I get something to stick there if I source everything properly?
No, and that's that I can say from actual history is a big no. I actually spoke to one of the editors who was trying very hard to get an entry made about the Caracol Industrial Park that they built with all of the money from the earthquake relief, and they would not allow that article to stick. Any attempts to mention that incident in the Clinton Foundation page were removed. It didn't matter how well this guy sourced the material. It was just no way, no how, that's not getting in there. And this was in the run-up to the 2016 election. So it was very, very important that, you know, Hillary Clinton have the nicest page ever. And of course, didn't end up working out so well for her. But I mean, the thing that a lot of people don't understand about Wikipedia is that the number of editors actually peaked in 2007. It's been going down ever since then, because new editors come along, try to make some changes to Wikipedia. They get their changes reverted within 5 minutes if it's on anything remotely sensitive. And believe me, like, you might not think that certain things are politically sensitive, but there's always somebody somewhere who is going to make an issue out of them. So unless you're like, even like a mathematical theorem, I'm sure there's somebody who's going to take that deeply personally and come by and reverse your whatever edit you make. So like, yeah, Wikipedia numbers have been going down. I think they hit 51,000 at their most in 2007. And that's really not a lot of people when you consider how many millions of articles there are on Wikipedia. So there are people who just spend all their time editing Wikipedia, and or they lend out their usernames to be edited, to be used by other people to edit.
If they're real people. So Can you talk a little bit about Philip Cross?
Yes, that was who I was getting to. Yeah, Philip Cross is supposedly an autistic man who lives in England, and who he goes around and, I mean, basically, if you have the leftist politics and you don't like war and you don't think that the US and the UK should be fighting all these wars, Philip Cross doesn't like you, and he's going to make a lot of edits to your page. He'll make thousands. I think he made over thousands and thousands of edits to George Galloway's page, to the point that he finally put up some money and said, I'll pay anybody who can tell me who this guy is. And they tracked him down, and it turned out, now this is what I was told, I don't know if this is still what people believe, but I was told that Philip Cross, his router is used as a pass-through by certain members of a Murdoch-controlled media property, and that these people all use Philip Cross's thing to basically make big messes out of the people they don't like, their Wikipedia bios. So yeah, basically, if you have the wrong opinion on Syria, Philip Cross will show up on your page, and he'll make a huge catastrophe. And he will, of course, because the guy does nothing supposedly but sit in front of Wikipedia all day, and you can look at his edit history, is just nonstop. There's no day that he is not edited for at least several hours, and he doesn't miss Christmas, he doesn't go on holiday, he does not stop, he just edits.
And 30,000 edits or something.
It's a ridiculous amount. He's like number 23 on the all-time number of people editing Wikipedia, which is ridiculous.
So it's unlikely this guy is an individual human being.
It's very, very difficult to believe. I mean, for one thing, there are multiple styles of the discourse that he engages in, and I don't think that this one guy is going to play all these characters. If you look at his Twitter account, which I don't know if he still has the Twitter account, but a couple of years ago he did, he was followed by all these like senior figures and like UK politics, and was like, wait, what? Why this complete nobody? I mean, who lives supposedly in his father's basement in England is being followed by like Oliver Cam at the Times UK, and like the guy supposedly has a big thing for Oliver Cam. Like Oliver Cam is his favorite journalist, and he'll defend him to the. I mean, for a while, everybody thought that Philip Cross was Oliver Cam, but supposedly that's not the case. And I don't know.
Oh.
Maybe Oliver Cam uses Philip Cross. I don't know, but it's a very strange situation, and I think that the Philip Cross thing did a lot to wake up people, at least in the UK, to the idea that maybe this Wikipedia thing isn't like a crowdsourced, like democratic encyclopedia. It's just such a joke.
If you're a mainstream figure, if you're an Obama, if you're a Clinton, if you're a Tony Blair, you're not going to have Philip Cross editing your website.
Well, you might have him come by and make pretty it up a little bit. He might reverse some edits that maybe somebody called Tony Blair a war criminal, and so he might come by and erase that, and he'll hover over it to make sure it doesn't get reverted. And because these people do hover, like there's the ones on Gary's page especially, they were big hoverers. Like I said, 5 minutes, 3 minutes, you couldn't make a change without it getting reverted like immediately. So
if I were a whistleblower and somebody made a page about me and somebody like Philip Cross comes along, to what extent would I be able to edit my own page or have it removed?
That's an interesting question, because it's changed over the years. Like in the past, you used to be able to get it removed. Like say if you were maybe a marginal political figure who was saying some very inflammatory stuff, but that happened to be true about a certain political event, you could make the argument that maybe you weren't or somebody could make the argument on your behalf. You're not supposed to edit your own Wikipedia page, but people break that rule all the time. All the time, literally. It's like the way that things are done over there. But you can make the argument that maybe this person isn't that important because they're not covered in the mainstream media, and et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of those people at least used to be able to get their pages removed. I know several who have successfully done that, but this was back before 2010. This was back when Wikipedia was not one of the forces that is literally going to be setting out the internet of the future. And then we can talk about that later, because it's very, very disturbing and it needs to not be allowed to happen. But as far as now, yeah, if you're a whistleblower and your page is basically the bathroom wall of the internet, getting all kinds of slanders put up about you, libels put up about you, you're probably not going to be able to get it taken down, because they'll find a reason. If they can find a mention in you in the mainstream media, then they have no reason to take your page down, because they can defame you. And it's basically become like just this easy way to wreck people's reputations. And because it's the first thing that comes up on Google search, then yeah, you basically, I mean, one of the questions you mentioned in the email you were going to ask me is, what is a reputational cage? Wikipedia is a reputational cage. If somebody's looking to hire you for a position or wants to commission you to write an article or something, and they see your name and your Wikipedia page, and your Wikipedia page is talking all kinds of really terrible stuff, yeah, you're not going to get the job. Let's put it that way. Or I mean, I know people who've lost publishing contracts. It's really, it needs to be reined in, because it's doing a lot of damage to like what we would consider the reality-based community.
Of course, but there is a profound inconsistency here, isn't there? Because you mentioned you can't edit your own Wikipedia page, and yet you've got examples from the British Labour Party, in presumably this was Tony Blair era Labour Party. You've got NYPD, CIA editing their own entries from their own computers.
Yep. You got Jimmy Wales himself editing his own entry. He edited it a bunch of times to put himself back in as the sole founder of Wikipedia, because he and Larry Sanger had another spat, and he's repeatedly removed the co-founder designation to make himself just the founder.
Can you say a little bit more about Jimmy Wales, because he's one of the guys you're really critical of him. He's co-founder, not founder, as we are told in the big advertising board asking us for money.
Yeah, the fact that they put his face up. Yeah, the fact that they put his face up there on the advertising board is just really, it's a real punch in the face to anybody who's. Anyway, he came into Wikipedia. Apparently, one of his coworkers at Bomis, which was this sort of web ring, like pseudo porn, soft porn web ring. He hates being reminded of that, of course. He just calls it an internet advertising firm, but it was an internet advertising firm with topless women all over it. I mean, they used to have these web ring things in the early days of the web, like 2000. This was when the company was operating around then. And he and some of his friends discovered this wiki thing. And so he hired Larry Sanger to basically provide the philosophical basis. Sanger was a graduate student in philosophy at the time. And they put together this, it started as Newpedia, which was going to be an encyclopedia, online encyclopedia written by experts. Of course, that went by the wayside pretty quickly, about just whatever the things that the experts wanted to write about. It was just to be an online encyclopedia competitor to whatever encyclopedias were going on at the time, and they thought this is going to be a great idea, but the articles were coming too slowly. The Newpedia, the experts, there was a complicated review process. You send the articles in, gets scholarly reviewed, send back, the checks and balances you expect in regular scholarly operation. They didn't just throw those by the wayside immediately, but because it was going so slowly, Jimmy Wales got impatient and said, okay, well, we can put up this whole thing and anybody can edit it and it's going to be a lot faster. And sure enough, it was a lot faster and grew very, very quickly. And initially, Jimmy Wales wanted to put advertising on it. Like I said, the guy is devotee of Ayn Rand. He will do anything to make a buck. So this idea that he's this big liberal hero is such garbage. But I mean, he supposedly, his first wife told a magazine that he advised her against going into nursing as a career because altruism was for suckers. But this is the charitable non-profit Wikipedia. No, the reason why Wikipedia became a non-profit was because the Spanish language Wikipedia, which was one of the earliest ones to develop a mind of its own, basically Jimmy Wales wanted to put ads on Wikipedia, and the Spanish Wikipedians were like, no way. And they split off and they formed their own thing. So Jimmy Wales realized pretty quickly that, all these internet freedom guys, they're not taking so kindly to my idea to splash advertisements all over this great encyclopedia. So he figured out pretty quickly that, we gotta avoid paying taxes somehow. So let's make it a charitable foundation. And that's what happened. So now they get millions of dollars in donations. Those fundraising banners, don't pay any attention to them. They get, I think it was over 100 million in donations last year. And it cost about $2 million to run the site. So do the math, $98 million just sitting there in Jimmy Wales' hot little pocket. Although I shouldn't say that because they've actually hired, there's a lot of people working for Wikipedia right now. And that should scare everybody because they're ever expanding into different fields. And there's Wikidata, which I don't know if you remember a few years ago, Eric Schmidt of Google said that, there's a lot of people look at Google's long list of search results and they say that this is great. There's so much information out there, but it's actually, he called it a bug instead of a feature, because Google, if it's really to do its job, should only give you one result, the right result, or what Google thinks is the right result. And it's eventually going to merge with Wikipedia to do just that. I mean, there was for a while this sort of half-assed attempt to make it seem like Wikipedia and Google were competitors. And that didn't last very long. I mean, Google sort of ran this pseudo Wikipedia thing called Knol, K-N-O-L, like knowledge. And then Wikipedia has threatened repeatedly to debut a Google killing search engine, but neither of those projects really had much muscle behind them, and they were really more for show. Google just gave Wikipedia a couple $1 million this last year, and for its endowment and for its, because it's not just Wikimedia Foundation anymore, it's also the Wikimedia Endowment, which has got tons and tons of money now. And I have the number written down somewhere. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but it's big and it's getting bigger. And the idea is that Google, all of the voice activated devices like the Alexas and Google Home and all of these will just give you a Wikipedia answer. If you ask it a question, the answers that they get are from Wikipedia or they're from Wikidata, which is even worse than Wikipedia because it doesn't have to have a source. At least Wikipedia, you have to put a source in there, a reliable source, which I can tell you what reliable source means later. But in Wikidata, it's just you put in the information and it's programmed into all of these little devices. And so when you are asking Alexa or Google Home or whoever a question, you're probably getting Wikipedia back. And that's really scary because it's bad enough what they're able to do with just Wikipedia, with Wikidata and no source, and just you're communicating with a disembodied voice. That they've literally taken over reality at that point. And that is something that should not be allowed to happen.
There are all kinds of questions that throws up, aren't there? I mean, Wikipedia is used as a fact-checking entity.
Yes.
Yes,
it is.
Now, is this for Google? I can't remember.
It's used for for YouTube. They'll put Wikipedia things down on the bottom, and Google does use it. Their site rankers, the contractors they pay to like rank websites and stuff, they're advised to use Wikipedia as if they are unfamiliar with a website and they don't know who the web proprietor is, and they don't know how trustworthy the site is, and et cetera, et cetera. They are supposed to look up the person on Wikipedia. So, I mean, if that's not like the tail wagging the dog, I don't know what it is, but it's like the Wikipedia even has a giant disclaimer. If you go, you can navigate to it. It's on the site saying like, the site is subject to constant editing and should not be used as the basis for any like, I forget how they phrase it exactly, but there's a giant disclaimer basically saying none of this might happen to be true. And that's why they don't even try to aim for truth. They aim for verifiability, which is something very different. That verifiability just means that reliable sources have said it, more than one usually. And truth, of course, is something completely different. Truth means it's real and it's true and it's something that actually happened. But if it's not reported in reliable sources, it didn't happen according to Wikipedia. So,
and by reliable sources, they mean what?
Reliable sources, it's basically mainstream media at this point. And the gap has narrowed. It used to be, okay, well, you've got the state media, like somebody like RT or TASS news service in Russia, or you've got Telesur in Venezuela. Now, all of those have been shut out because, if the government doesn't agree with the US government or the UK government, then it's not allowed to be considered reliable anymore.
Well,
it doesn't matter. Yeah, and it doesn't matter that maybe these organizations report better on what's going on in their own country than say the New York Times. They're not they cannot be used. And so the Wikipedia editors, there's what's called a reliable sources notice board, which is where everybody goes to discuss, should this be considered a reliable source, should this not? And of course, as the number of editors gets smaller and smaller, the number of editors making these decisions gets smaller and smaller. And so basically the US mainstream media is the ultimate reliable source. If it's said in the New York Times, the Washington Post, whatever, it'll get in there. It doesn't matter if it's not true. New York Times and Washington Post have been very light on the truth things these last few years, but they're still hallowed ground as far as Wikipedians are concerned. And it's interesting because these that are very lightly fact-checked, if at all, these sources are considered green. They go green, yellow, red, I don't know why they insist on these color thing. It's like they expect people to be just really stupid and need to color coded to rely on. Anyway, so the Washington Post and New York Times are green, and then like actual scholarly studies published in scholarly journals, at least medically speaking, a lot of those are not allowed to be used in the medicine section. It has to be only like a Cochrane review or a meta-analysis or these like second level studies.
Yeah.
I mean, they call themselves like impartial and neutral. A neutral point of view is supposedly the pinnacle of Wikipedia. No, it's just not. It's not that way.
Democratic. Was there a university study that said something along the lines of 1%? Sorry, 1% of people make 77% of the edits. Or
Yes.
Something along
Yes. That's definitely the case because everybody else gets their edits reverted. No, there's definitely an editorial royalty. The people who've been there forever and who have achieved seniority, and usually they're part of these like the arbitration committee, which makes all the disciplinary decisions and things like that. And it's like they wrap up the important parts, the American politics, the Israel-Palestine, the UK politics, the parts that are like really disputed. They wrap those up in what I call editorial sanctions. And if you're an editor and you're not allowed to edit a certain article more than 3 times, say, if it's under this level of editorial sanctions. If you don't know that, or if somebody else reverts your article and you revert it back and you don't realize that that's counted as an edit, then you are not allowed to edit that section anymore. So that's the whole section of, let's say, American politics that you're now off limits from. And people get sick of that. People don't like sitting around waiting for their disciplinary sanctions to expire. People have lives.
So can I ask you about some of the conventional wisdom in a place like Cambridge then? Because if it's a non-political wiki entry on some subject that's being studied here, I don't know, Charles Dickens novels about this, that, or the other, some biblical interpretations, stuff that really doesn't matter in the world of politics. When you look at that stuff, no student would ever dare quote it in an essay, but it can be quite good. And although you would never quote it, you can follow the sources and it can lead you somewhere interesting. And you take the entry with a pinch of salt. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. But the assumption here is that if you approach this stuff critically, then this is absolutely fine and safe. Is there anything dangerous about that? Because this is where most of our Cambridge colleagues will say, well, it's not a problem for me because I'm a critical reader.
I think if it's something like literature entry and you are going to the sources and you're not just stopping at Wikipedia, then it can be used with the great discretion. And I mean, as long as it's, you know, that it's not something political. I mean, there's some literature is very political, and some people say maybe there's a nationalist faction from another country who's going to come in and put little stuff in that page. There's always like these weird battles between these Eastern European Baltic republics and Russia. Like they go at each other constantly, and they'll edit weird elements of literature and all this like history stuff that you wouldn't think would be very political. But so I don't know about Charles Dickens. I don't think that there's going to be huge amounts of political editors running around in Charles Dickens. But as you said, if you follow the sources and you just go right to those sources, I don't think that's necessarily a harmful thing to do. But you got to be careful you don't get lazy and start looking up your politicians on there, or your political parties or current events. Stay away from current events, seriously. The reality will transform before your very eyes as you watch the Wikipedia pages on current events. It's really appalling, the kind of stuff they put in there. But yeah, it's what I saw interesting the other day was New York Times had an editorial about the dangers of critical thinking. Now, this is, I mean, you don't expect the New York Times to go there. And obviously critical thinking is the thing that we need right now more than anything else. And it's the thing that children are not taught in school. And it's the thing that readers of New York Times do not have. But they're talking about the dangers of critical thinking and how, well, if you encounter a fact from a source that you don't know, you should look it up on Google, and you should go to Wikipedia, and you should spend no more than 90 seconds checking that fact. Hello, 90 seconds checking a fact. That you, from a source that you have no idea anything about, and you're going to spend 90 seconds on Wikipedia and you consider that fact checked? Dude, no.
If you're used to using Wikipedia in a critical way, it's still impossible to do what you're saying. It's still impossible to, almost to depart from the New York Times mandate, because people don't have time. And if you think, well, okay, I'll read it critically. When you read a political page, you can read it critically and still it's then framed in such a way that your attention is diverted down certain paths.
Yep,
and diverted
exactly.
from certain paths. So even when you're reading critically, or think you are, the entire framework of your critical thinking tends to be predetermined still by the wiki page, even if you go and check the sources and find out it's all not quite so secure as you think it might.
Right. Yeah, because if you look at the Clinton Foundation's page, you're not going to see any mention of Caracol Industrial Park. You're not going to know there was ever a Caracol Industrial Park. It's just, it's like if you're in a house and the house has no windows and someone asks you what color is the sky, you don't know sky. What is that? I don't have. There's no frame of reference. So, and it's really, I mean, the fact that Wikipedia has obtained so much power in such a short time is very, very disturbing. And it's trying to insert itself in like this web, the next stage of the web that Tim Berners-Lee, the guy who's basically called the father of the World Wide Web, he's gotten on the big fake news bandwagon and is talking about how we need to have a new, better web without all this disinformation and stuff. Disinformation basically meaning wrong think, of course. And Wikipedia, the Wikimedia Foundation rather, is right dead center in all of that. They want to build the architecture for this new web, and that is very disturbing because, I mean, anybody who's ever been on the wrong end of a Wikipedia entry knows what this can do. And if we're going to be taking our reality cues from Wikipedia, then humanity is going to, I mean, humanity has already suffered a pretty bad fall, I would say, but it's going to get a lot worse. And I mean, you've got in the US now, we've got, of course, people like the New York Times talking about how we need a reality czar because, I don't know, did you hear about that? The reality czar thing?
Reality star.
A reality czar, yeah, because people don't know what's true or not. And so they need a government official to tell them what's true. But I'm not making this up. They actually said this in a New York Times article. And it was, they said that the writer said he went around asking like experts, of course, for solutions to the reality problem because, you know, even in the 2020 election, they couldn't quite keep all the dissenting opinions off the table, although they definitely did their best. They can't shut everybody up, and so they want a reality czar to shut everybody up. I mean, if you go on Wikipedia, the first reliable source they kicked off was the Daily Mail. Now, nobody's going to mourn the death of the Daily Mail, and obviously the Daily Mail didn't die. It's still a hugely popular website, but it's just not allowed on Wikipedia anymore. And so once they had success with that, they thought, okay, well, we can do this with everybody. And so they went after Breitbart, Daily Caller, all these right-wing sites from the US. And then they started going after I think it was probably around the same time they went after RT and Sputnik and all those. And I think they've started making further incursions. And this is what the American left doesn't understand. Now, when they cheer for censorship against right-wingers or whatever, they don't realize that they're next. And this is exactly what's happening, is that now the Wikipedia is going after the left-wing sites like Jacobin and these websites that, or Mid-Press News, although Mid-Press News, I think, knew what was coming as far as when they started going after the right-wingers. But it's like it never stops, and it's the whole first they came for the blank and I did not speak up because I was not a blank, and it's like that's become a complete cliche by now, but it's a cliche because it's like so obvious and people are still not getting it, and the American left is hopelessly lost, I'm afraid, and I consider myself a member of the American left, but there's not a lot of us left, let's say.
People love cliches like this when it's dislocated from reality. The moment you apply it to something and it becomes real, people don't like the cliches.
Yep.
That tends to be how they work. Is there an antidote? Is there some kind of a legitimate response to this?
I mean, Larry Sanger has been trying to build new Wikipedias that correct the mistakes of the original Wikipedia. It never seems to work. The guy is, I mean, you got to give him credit for trying, but he's done like 3 or 4 of them now. Citizendium, Everpedia. I think he's on another one now. It's just not working because if you have people there, and the reason that Wikipedia took off is because you didn't need to put your real name. You didn't actually need to be an expert in anything. There was a guy who had become like one of the top figures in the arbitration committee and claimed to be a graduate professor with a theology degree, and it turned out that he was like a college dropout who was living in his mother's basement.
24-year-old,
Ryan, whatever his name is, SJ, he was his username. And then there was like the Scots Wikipedia, where it was some kid who didn't speak the language, but who had just rewritten everything in like a Scottish accent, a very exaggerated Scottish accent, which, I mean, that's a whole language that guy messed up. So I mean, it's the sky's the limit with Wikipedia, and that's always going to have more appeal, and that's a problem. I mean, I think the only fix would be to make humans less willing to embark on these paths, or give them something else to do that is like that would satisfy their need for a fantasy life in which they can consider themselves an expert. I don't know how that would work. I mean, I don't like the idea of mass behavior modification, but it's like they're already doing mass behavior modification with Wikipedia. So I mean, we're already 50% into the process. I would say more than 50%, but they're trying so hard to shoehorn this into education now. And that's the part that really scares me, because once they've got kids hooked on Wikipedia, They already kind of do, but it's like so many teachers rightfully tell kids, don't be citing this in your papers. They can't do anything if the kid plagiarizes from Wikipedia because they don't have time to look up every paper and see is this. But yeah, there's a woman on the Wikimedia Foundation Board of Trustees whose whole purpose is to get this into schools, to educate with Wikipedia. And now that we've got everybody taking classes from home, who needs textbooks anymore? Textbooks are expensive. Oh, let's just go to Wikipedia. There was a university that was doing that even before the quarantine in, I think, Minnesota. And they were talking about how, oh yeah, university textbooks are so expensive, so everybody's just going to use these Wikipedia textbooks instead, which of course is the worst possible idea. So, I mean, I don't know if the answer is, because Wikipedia is not going anywhere. I mean, it's huge, it's got a ton of money, it's got ridiculous amounts of corporate support, and so it's not going anywhere. But if we can try to steer academia away from it, at least, that's why I was so interested to go on your show, because like academia is right now where the rubber is meeting the road. And like if Wikipedia gets to take over academia, then there goes basically any sort of credibility that the Western intellectual world once had, and that's not something that really should be thrown away, I don't think.
Helen Buyniski, thank you very much.